I grew up in a house that was full of anger. So let's get that out in the open. My father was very, very, very aggressive. I'd call him a rageaholic. He lived in a world of anger. And a lot of his anger was, I'd say, righteous. I mean, he had a degree in engineering and he never could get a job beyond being an administrative clerk. And so there's a lot of social injustice done with him. And so some of that fueled his anger. But he was full of rage, full of it. And he expressed it all the time, mostly to his kids because we were the only ones he had power over. My mother was equally angry, though she would not tell you she was angry. She would say, "I'm not angry," but she was pretty passive and she could wield some thunder, just very sneaky, very hidden, very passive. She can smile at you and you think everything's good, but she is seething on the inside and it's going to come back around at some point. So I grew up in a world where anger was normal. It was part of the way we lived. And I did not grow up thinking I was abused. I grew up thinking this is the way it was. In fact, most of the people of color I hung out with, that's the way their parents were. Everybody was pretty much getting, the beat down from our parents. And our parents were very strict and very controlling. But I took on anger as an identity. I became the angry one in my family. So my siblings could be more passive and I was this outward, aggressively angry person. And most of my anger I put into activism for many, many years. Right out of high school, on into college, up until about law school. I pretty much lived in activism, and it was a way to be angry all the time. And I was intimidating and just the whole gambit of what you would think of as anger, I lived it. And even as when I got out of law school, the position that had the most power was the prosecutor's office. That's where I went, was the prosecutor's office. I'm angry, I'm powerful, that's where I'm going. And so my whole life was built around intimidating and using anger to get my way. And I really, to be honest, did not think of anger as anything other than that, to get my way. And whether that anger was passive or outwardly aggressive, I thought that was the whole point of it. And when I came into the Dhamma, though, I left a black church experience where it was loud and big and came into a Dhamma practice that was quiet and very subdued is probably the best way I could say it. It just seemed so opposite of what I knew to be true. And for a long time, I thought the point of Dhamma was to somehow shed this anger, get rid of it, finally be done with it, let it go. And so I spent many of I'd say the first 10 years of my practice trying to not have any remnants of anger. So if anger arose, I wanted to practice in a way that would diminish it, because the diminishment of anger would be I was less reactive. I associated anger with basically any kind of reactivity. And so the more I was able to steady myself, get still, get quiet, I'm good, I thought I'm going along in the Dhamma. I'm doing good. This good practice. And it was good practice. I mean, my whole world changed, and I was my access to kindness, my access to caring for other people, my access of even being intimate and aware of other people as a like an interconnected sense of the rest of the world happened because I began to practice trying to settle myself into stillness. But then my nephew got shot. Accident. He was a bystander. And I fell into a level of rage that I could not manage. I could not control it. I could not get it under control. I couldn't keep it righteous. I was consumed by it to the point where when I would go to work, if a defense attorney just said one remark, I might scream at him from across the courtroom. I mean, I'd lost it. I was losing it on coworkers. I was just losing it. And so I went to my teacher and I'm like, I got to do something to tamp down this anger here. It's out of control. I need to get it back to where it was. Nice and smooth, easy, good practitioner, good yogi. That's where I want to go. And so I asked him, how do I get rid of this anger? And he said, look at irritation. And I'm thinking, yeah, bruh, you don't get it. I don't have irritation. I go from 0 to 90 with rage. I bypass all the irritation stuff. So I said, I don't really get irritated. I am rageful. I want to work on that. He says, Tuere, I'm telling you, look at your irritations. I said, will that get rid of the rage? Is that going to get rid of the anger? He says, don't worry about the anger. Don't worry about the rage. You just work on your irritations. And I am having difficulty listening to this man. He's a white man. I'm thinking, you just don't know the rage of a black woman when it gets triggered. You're like still operating under that simple stuff. Like everybody's peaceful and calm. But I was worried about this rage. And he said to me, I that's what I told him. I'm like, no, I'm talking about black women rage. That's what I want to work on. He said, Tuere, by the time you get to rage, you've already tumbled into it. So it's skillful means not to harm someone. If you want to work on your rage, anger, you got to work on the irritations way before that rage gets there. And you got to start there because that's the conditioning that's leading into this anger that you're having. So I didn't really believe him, but I started looking at this fake irritation because I don't get irritated. And boy, was I surprised. I was irritated 90% of my life. 90% of my waking hours was spent whining, complaining, and bitching in my mind about something. Most of it I could just manage, and so I wouldn't say anything. And it was kind of that, trying to manage that I began to realize, oh, there's something different going on here. There's two things going on here. Because, those of you that are activists, the minute we start talking about anger, it's this felt sense of, I gotta give up the energy that helps me get up in the morning and do my activism. How am I gonna do that if I give up the anger? And I began to realize there are two different things here. So I just want to touch on 4 points, and then we're going to talk about it more broadly. First of all, real anger is an emotion. It is impermanent. It is ephemeral. It does not stay around. It does not linger and hang out. It is a burst of energy that can get us to move in ways we would be hesitant to move. It allows us to do what needs to be done on behalf of other beings, on behalf of ourselves. It's what allows us to move in ways that support us, that actually takes care of another. I want to read a quote from, who did this quote? David White. This is the best quote I've ever heard of anyone articulating anger, the way I think of anger now. They say anger is the deepest form of compassion. Compassion. So anger is the deepest form of compassion for another, for the world, for the self, for a life, for the body, for a family, and for all our ideals. All vulnerable, all those vulnerable, and all possibly about to be hurt. Anger is the deepest form of compassion for that. Stripped of physical imprisonment and violent reaction, anger is the purest form of care. The internal living flame of anger always illuminates what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for. Yeah, that's what I think anger is. True anger, the anger that we need to survive. When it's stripped of physical imprisonment, that's what I call that passive aggressive and violent reaction. That was my father's outward and mine, outward aggression. When anger is stripped of that, then it is a saving grace for the world. And if we cultivate that anger, the true anger, I think we are going to make a huge difference in the world. And learning to speak from that, learning to say something out of that anger, because we do not need to fear harming another being. We need only connect to the compassion that anger is bringing. That's what I think real anger is. And that needs to be cultivated. And in order to cultivate that, I want to clarify, because I don't believe you're going to hear this kind of talk from a Dhamma teacher regularly. But I've been with anger too long in my life to somehow give a talk that just strips away anger from its gift that it has been for me throughout my life. And it has been a gift that has got me through many, many, many situations of injustice and unfairness. But there's another thing that I think when we use the word anger in Dhamma, we are pointing to something else. We are pointing to aversion, and that aversion is connected to greed, hatred, and delusion. Now, aversion connected to greed, hatred, and delusion, that is problematic. That is difficult, and that is harmful for us. It is the root. It's one of the unwholesome roots of our suffering. So I want to talk a little bit about that anger, that aspect of anger that is destroying our internal practice. And until we're willing to practice with this part, which is what I think Rodney was pointing to, until I was willing to get at my own little irritations, my own little averse mind. I'm sorry, it wasn't a little averse mind, my own big averse mind. Until I was willing to do that, then trying to point my finger at anger was irrelevant. And it was trying to strip away an energy that I actually need to survive, to be able to move and to do big things for people in the world. So there's three things, there's four, what is it, 4 or 5 that I have? I think it's 5 things I want to point to, that we have to be careful about this anger, this aversion. Anger, but it's the aversion that we're talking about. I want to keep pointing to it as anger because we have all these Dhamma talks on aversion. And we kind of ignore the talk on anger. So I'm talking about anger, but the word I'm using, the word underneath this is aversion. That's what I'm talking about. But we have to see it in the context of aversion, of anger, because we want to see this aspect of anger is what's killing us. It's what practice is trying to cultivate our letting go of. So the first thing is this aversion is a subtle expander. This anger that is aversion is not like real anger, which is ephemeral, it's immediate, and it moves us. This aversion type anger is a subtle expander. It starts with little bitty edges, the little irritants that I did not see because I had the capacity suck it up. I could take that. Oh, I can handle that. Oh yeah, I can tuck that away. I'm not going to say nothing. I'm not going to do nothing. I'm not going to be that way. I'm going to be a good yogi. And I could begin to subtly just tuck it away. But it's like yeast in flour. It is expanding, growing bigger. You might have a little bitty ball of flour and you put it down on the cabinet. It's going to get pretty big. So that's what happens with this aversive type anger. It is a subtle expander. And then it begins to seep into other ways of relating through life. If you don't pay attention to that connection to greed, hatred, and delusion, that is what consumes us when we get caught in this aversive kind of the reactivity that comes with anger. The second thing is anger. This aversive type anger is a trickster. It convinces you that it's okay to be angry. So for people like me, I should say it's okay to be angry or it's not okay to be angry. For people like me who are averse by nature, I have that kind of aversive personality type. Anger is my go-to energy. And so the mind kind of tricks me. Instead of me feeling disappointment and sadness and hurt, those are all wimpy emotions to me. I could feel anger and I could feel empowered and I could feel moved by it. Like I'm going to do something about this. But really, that trickster of aversiveness is just pushing away what I don't want to feel, which is disappointment. It is hurt. It's embarrassment. It's all that sadness, all that that stuff. I'd rather go to the anger and do something about it. But it's also the opposite for other people. People who are seethingly angry will never admit they're angry, but they will admit they're sad. They're like, sadness is okay for me to feel. I feel betrayed and hurt, but they won't say, I'm really, really pissed. I'm really angry. So that trickster energy of this aversive anger turns what would be a co-arising impermanent emotion into an entangled story that we get caught in our story rather than feeling those emotions that we really don't want to feel. And it's different for other people. Some people don't want to feel anger, so they feel other emotions. And some people don't want to feel other emotions, so they feel anger. The third thing is that we live in a society that kind of convinces us that we could control our anger. I mean, just the very notion of anger management that I kept sending all these defendants into anger management. You got to learn how to manage that anger. I can't manage my own anger, but I'm going to send you into a program to manage that anger. And we do have an understanding around this thought that I can manipulate, control, and manage my anger. And we can learn to understand anger, real anger, the explosive anger, and learn to feel it so that we don't get caught with this expansive, this subtle expanding trickster type energy. But what we cannot do is manipulate and con anger. This averse anger. It knows us more than we know ourselves. And it knows where all the dead bodies are buried. It knows all the little tricks of the trade that we've had over the years. And it will cheat and play dirty. And it will maneuver you into a belief that you are righteous in where you're at. And you will never look inside at the con it is running on you rather than you running on it. So we have to be careful to pay attention to whether or not we are entangled. That's really the gauge I use. If I'm entangled in something, if I hear myself spinning around, having the same old conversation in my head about the same old story and the same old people and all of that, I know that's aversive. That is not real anger, because real anger is compassionate and it gets me to move and take care of somebody, something. And that spinning in the mind, grumbling, complaining, arguing, that energy is part of this aversive anger that's doing a number on us. Again, so we don't feel that emotional energy that we cannot bear. We cannot let ourselves touch into. So oftentimes this aversive anger, this is the hard part. I think these last two are the hard ones. This aversive type anger has nothing to do with the situation or the people. That's the story we get entangled in so we don't look at ourselves. Because aversive anger is really a root cause of pushing away unpleasantness. That's it. It does not have any like a altruistic, what did David White say? It does not have any of the internal living flame of anger illuminating what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for. No, it is spinning in I don't like, I don't like, I don't like. That shouldn't have happened. This can't be like this. I can't believe they did that. And it's spinning in that, entangled in that. Because underneath that is probably the unpleasantness of hurt, disappointment, embarrassment, betrayal, all kinds of vulnerable type, and fear. That energy is underneath that anger. And so it has a way of pointing us outward rather than inward. Bhante Buddharakkhita, the monk, Theravada monk from Uganda, who always, he's at a lot of the long retreats. He's been my teacher for a long, long time. And one time he told in a Dhamma talk this story about how to deal with anger. This way he said anger was. In his way of speaking, he says that you come out of the Dhamma hall, you know, you're at IMS, you've had a great retreat, you come out of the Dhamma hall and your car is parked right there in the circle entry, if you've ever been to IMS. And just as you come out of the hall, you've packed the car, you got one more thing to bring out. Just as you come out with your last thing, somebody takes a lit match and throws it into your car, and it lights on fire. Like, puts all this gasoline on it, and then throws a match in there. You are like, what? And they take off running. So you take off after them. And you run and you run and you run and you run and you run. And maybe you catch them. Maybe you don't. Maybe you catch them and the police come. And maybe the police arrest them, maybe they don't. Maybe you catch them, they get arrested, maybe they get tried and convicted, maybe not. Who knows? He went through this whole litany of a story around what could happen with this person. Sometimes a person might say, I don't know why I threw that match in. I don't know why I put that gasoline on your car and threw the match in there. I don't know. Somebody might say, I was mad, so I did that. Who knows? He went through this whole thing. And then he says, this is what anger is. This aversive anger that I'm talking about. He says, because what you need to do is start pulling your stuff out of the car right then and there. But we run after the person and all our stuff burns up. But you need to be getting in that car and pulling out passports, stuff, anything you can salvage. So with this, when you begin to learn to access the distinction between real anger and this aversive anger, then you can begin to see that when that aversive anger comes, that is a sign to turn inward and look at what's going on with you. Unhook yourself from that, and then you can move out into the world and do what needs to be done. But if you move out into the world with that aversive anger, then we will just burn up on the inside. And then the last thing is that in a way, we deal with anger. This aversive anger is it's like a masquerade. It's like a magician. So every time I would win an argument, and I was a master debater, so I could win me some arguments. Well, I mean, I would get intimidated, if need be, just to win. Every time I would win, the next time an argument comes around, what do you think happens? I gotta win. And the next time, I gotta win. And before you know it, that aversive type anger pushes us, tumbles us into always needing to win, always needing to win, always needing to convince the person. And we can't stop because we need to win. It just becomes more about the winning, the being right, the convincing the other person of their wrongness, and we lose our ability to let things go. I had to learn how to, those of you that know me know I'm a Virgo. We are always right. I cannot help it for the other signs in the world that think they're right. Virgos happen to be right all the time. And so as a person that's always right, it's very difficult for me to ever let anyone else be right, ever. So I had to actually give myself a vow of restraint as a gift to other people. I'm giving them the opportunity to be right. It was the only way I could let go of that constant aversive need to be right all the time. My way has to be the right way. It's not that I'm not saying I think of it as I'm better than everyone. I'm not even saying that everybody is just wrong. It's just in that aversive, winning, thinking mind, my way is always the right way. And in order for me to let go of that, I had to practice letting go of the need to be right. So part of that aversive energy is going against the grain, because aversion says this moment is wrong. And you have to go against that grain and let the moment be as it is. It's like you have to let what your mind thinks is wrong be right, which is totally flipped. But that's the wisdom of Buddha. That's what his wisdom was. He recognized that as long as we followed the habitual tendencies of grabbing after greed, desirable things, pushing away undesirable things, and ignoring everything else, he recognized that that was just going to send us into more and more and more need to grab after what's pleasurable, push away what's not, and ignore everything else. And we just get sucked into, entangled into it. So as a practice of learning the distinction, we let go of that. I gotta stop. I could go on forever. I gotta stop. So I'm gonna read David White one more time, because yes, this is my, he's quoting me in what I think about anger. Anger, real anger, not the aversive type, is the deepest form of compassion for another, for the world, for the self, for a life, the body, a family, for all our ideals, all those that are vulnerable, and all those who possibly about to be hurt. Stripped of physical imprisonment, passive aggression, and violent reaction, that outward aggression, anger is the purest form of care. The internal living flame of anger always illuminates what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for. Man. So let's take a moment to sit here. See what words kind of resonate and what words don't. Thank you so much for your kind attention. What you're pointing to is this aversive anger. That's what it is. It is aversion. It feels like anger to us, and we can tolerate it. We can call it that. But really, it is basic, pure aversion. And that aversion is to be destroyed. It is to be unentangled, unhooked, as a means for nibbana. And so seeing it is the first step. Seeing that, oh, I am withholding, that's my aversion. And that, seeing that, is how you begin to distinguish that from the moments when you really see some harm in the world and there's anger that arises and it comes and it goes. Do you see that? I mean, these analogies, they kind of work sometimes in some scenarios and they don't. The thing that one thing about Dhamma, when you read a lot of suttas, something that you notice a lot is the Buddha often does not say what something is. Like in the West, in our teaching, we describe everything. We just define everything, describe it, articulate it, talk about it. But the Buddha's ways of dealing with things were very different. And mostly what he did was talked about the distinction between this and this. So there's this and then there's this. And here's this and this what happens. And here's this and this what happens. And you say, well, which one is right? Well, there's the distinction. There's this and then there's this. And then you got to kind of figure out how to move through it. So the fact that you're practicing, or this contemplation, like, is there a distinction between anger and aversive anger? That's what you have to find. And when you find it, you will know, you will understand both why aversive anger is to be uprooted and why real anger needs to be cultivated. Because one is here as a form of compassion to move in the world, and one is basically just to get my way. And that trying to get our way doesn't always work. Good. Anyway, thank you all. I love the heart, especially since I was so worried. It's hard to talk about anger with BIPOC people because we live with so much anger. And there's always that sense of, I don't want to be the angry Black woman or the angry BIPOC person. And I'm saying, fill up in all that anger. Don't be worrying about it. But make sure you know the distinction between that anger that's going to move us in the world and help us change things, and that anger that is just aversive, and it is to be uprooted as practitioners. So let us dedicate the merit to all beings who are struggling with anger, struggling with injustice, who are living out of it, who are trapped in it, harmed by it. And we all know there's injustice all over the world. So all of it, everywhere. We have the capacity as practitioners to put our energy together and send it out in the world and make a difference. It may not seem like much, but it makes a difference. So for any beneficial energy that comes from our practice, may it go out in the world and support all beings who are trapped in the destruction of anger. Thank you so much.